Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the fall of the House of Assad in Syria.
Oh, wow.
So this is a dynasty that held power for 50 years.
hmm
And you guys have sent us some really interesting articles from AP News and Tagesschau.de.
Okay.
And yeah, we're going to be kind of unpacking all this. And honestly, the speed at which these recent events happened is just,
Yeah.
it's mind-blowing.
It really is fascinating to watch how quickly the seemingly unshakable can crumble. For years, Assad just appeared impervious,
Right.
bolstered by these really powerful allies.
Yeah.
And seemingly unfazed by, global pressure.
Right.
And then there's like the whole thing shifts.
It's like watching a political earthquake in real time.
Yeah.
These AP articles paint such a vivid picture of Bashar al-Assad's early years. He wasn't always this figure of controversy. Like imagine, a young Western-educated ophthalmologist embracing technology, married to this stylish woman from Britain. When he took over from his father in 2000 after 3 decades of iron-fisted rule, there was this real sense of optimism, like a hope for real change.
Oh, absolutely. That period, often referred to as the Damascus Spring, was a moment of genuine potential. Assad, he did relax some restrictions, allowed for more open discussion, even released some political prisoners. And for a brief time, it seemed like Syria might actually be on a path towards a more open society.
But then reading through these articles, it became clear that the spring was very short-lived. The AP reports detail how Assad ultimately, had kind of reverted back to his father's tactics,
Right.
using his secret police to silence dissent and just really consolidate his grip on power.
Yeah, this shift back towards repression became even more pronounced with the Arab Spring uprisings in 2011. Assad's reaction to the protests was swift and brutal. He unleashed his military to quash any opposition. And this really marked, I think, the tragic descent into this devastating civil war that has ravaged Syria for over a decade.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to read about the scale of suffering caused by this conflict. Hundreds of thousands dead, millions displaced, a nation left in ruins. Yet Assad managed to hold on. He clung to power amidst all this chaos. What allowed him to remain in control for so long?
Well, I think Assad's survival can be attributed to a very carefully constructed web of alliances,
Okay.
both within Syria and on the international stage. So, domestically, he strategically leveraged the loyalty of the Alawite sect, a minority group to which he belongs.
Right.
Key positions in the government and the military were filled with Alawites, ensuring a core of just unwavering support.
And it wasn't just about sectarian loyalty, right? The AP articles highlight how Assad also cultivated relationships with influential Sunni merchant families. I'm assuming this was a way to maintain some level of economic stability, even if the country was kind of falling apart around him.
Precisely by securing the support of these economic powerhouses, Assad was able to keep at least a semblance of the Syrian economy functioning,
Okay.
which was crucial for his regime's survival.
It's almost like he was playing this complex game of chess,
Yeah.
balancing all these different factions and interests to stay in power. And speaking of family, let's not forget the role Assad's own relatives played in all of this. The AP articles mention how he strategically placed family members in key positions of authority.
Yes, the Assad family network was a key pillar of his regime. His younger brother Mar, for example, headed the elite presidential guard. This formidable force, fiercely loyal to the Assad family, and the strategic placement of family members ensured control over these crucial security apparatuses.
It's a case of keeping power close. Very close.
For sure.
But as much as Assad relied on these internal alliances, he also had some powerful friends on the international scene, didn't he?
Absolutely. Assad's regime would likely have crumbled much sooner if not for the unwavering support of Russia and Iran.
Let's talk about those relationships a bit more. Why were these countries so invested in propping up Assad?
Their motivations were deeply rooted in geopolitics. For Russia, Syria provided a crucial foothold in the Mediterranean, thanks to their naval base at Tartus.
Right.
This base gave them significant strategic influence in the region. Iran, on the other hand, viewed Syria as a critical link in what's often called the Shiite Crescent.
Okay, could you explain that term a bit?
Sure.
What exactly is the Shiite Crescent, and why is Syria so important to it?
So the Shiite Crescent refers to a geographically contiguous area stretching from Iran through Iraq and Syria to Lebanon, where there are significant Shiite populations. For Iran, a Shiite-led country. Maintaining influence in this region is crucial for both religious and strategic reasons.
So Syria was a key piece in this geopolitical puzzle.
Yes.
For both Russia and Iran. It wasn't just about propping up a dictator. It was about advancing their own interests in the region.
Exactly. By supporting Assad, Russia, and Iran were able to project power counter Western influence and secure their strategic goals in the Middle East. It was very much a symbiotic relationship. Assad benefited from their military and economic support, and in turn provided them with a valuable ally in a strategically crucial region.
It's a fascinating, if somewhat disturbing, example of how international alliances can be forged, not necessarily out of shared values, but out of cold, hard strategic calculations.
Right.
But even with this complex network of support, both domestically and internationally, Assad's grip on power eventually loosened.
And that brings us to the truly remarkable turn of events that have unfolded in recent weeks. The rebel offensives that ultimately led to Assad's downfall. What's striking about this offensive, as detailed in the Tagesschau.de articles, is the sheer speed and coordination with which it was executed. It seems to have caught everyone off guard.
Yeah, from reading these reports, it sounds like even Assad himself was blindsided by how swiftly the rebels were able to advance. But before we dive into the offensive itself, I want to talk about the group that spearheaded this campaign.
Okay.
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS.
Ah, yes, HTS. Their role in this offensive has certainly raised many questions, particularly given their history.
Exactly. Both the AP and Tagesschau.de reports make it clear that this group has ties to al-Qaeda. And that seems like a pretty significant detail to unpack, considering they're now a major player in the future of Syria.
It's definitely a detail that warrants careful consideration. What's intriguing is that HTS has been trying to rebrand itself in recent years, distancing itself from al-Qaeda and projecting a more moderate image. They've even gone so far as to establish what they call a salvation government in Idlib province back in 2017.
I'm reading about their leader, Abu Muhammad al-Golani, giving interviews where he's talking about things like pluralism and tolerance. It's a stark contrast to the image most people have of an al-Qaeda-linked group.
It does make you wonder about the motivations behind this rebranding effort. Is it a genuine ideological shift? A pragmatic move to gain international legitimacy? Or perhaps a mix of both? These are questions that will undoubtedly be debated and analyzed as the situation in Syria continues to unfold.
Yeah, it's a complex puzzle. And understanding HTS's true motivations is essential to understanding what might come next for Syria. But for now, let's shift back to the offensive itself. How did HTS and their allies manage to achieve such a stunning victory against Assad's forces? These reports describe this incredible wave of advances, key cities like Aleppo, Hama, and Homs, falling to the rebels with what seemed like minimal resistance from Assad's forces.
So the Tagesschau.de articles describe a scenario where government troops seemed to simply melt away. Some analysts believe there might have been widespread defections, soldiers just abandoning their posts rather than fighting for a lost cause. Others suggest it could have been a calculated strategy, a series of tactical retreats to avoid direct confrontations and conserve resources.
It's almost as if Assad's regime, despite all its carefully constructed alliances and all of the security apparatuses, was suddenly hollowed out from the inside. The will to fight the belief in Assad's invincibility seems to have evaporated almost overnight.
That's a very astute observation, and this apparent lack of resistance only served to embolden the rebel forces, allowing them to gain momentum and advance rapidly towards the capital Damascus.
And Damascus, as the heart of Assad's power, must have been a chaotic scene. The AP paints a vivid picture of a city in turmoil. Crowds celebrating in the streets, soldiers abandoning their posts, even looters breaking into government buildings. It must have felt like the end of an era.
Indeed, and according to multiple reports, amidst this chaos, Assad himself fled the country. His current whereabouts are unknown, adding another layer of intrigue to this already dramatic situation.
It's a truly seismic shift in power. It marks the end of a dynasty that had seemed unshakable for decades. But with Assad gone, and the rebels, particularly HTS, in a position of power, the big question now is, what's next for Syria?
That is the question everyone is asking, and unfortunately the answer remains unclear. The sources you've shared highlight significant concerns about the potential for instability and further violence.
Yeah, both the AP and the Tagesschau.de reports expressed those concerns pretty explicitly.
A primary point of concern is the uncertainty surrounding HTS's true agenda. They're publicly promoting these messages of moderation, pluralism, tolerance, a far cry from their al-Qaeda roots. But many remain skeptical, wondering if this is a genuine ideological evolution, or simply a calculated tactic to gain legitimacy on the world stage.
It's understandable that people are wary. HTS's history isn't easily forgotten. This sudden shift in power creates a vacuum, and power vacuums, as history has shown us time and again, can be extremely volatile.
Precisely the question is, will HTS manage to consolidate its control and establish a stable government? Or will their hardline ideology resurface, leading to further repression and conflict? The answers to these questions will have profound implications for the Syrian people.
And it's not just about HTS, right?
Yeah.
The AP articles mentioned several other rebel factions that participated in this offensive. What happens to those groups now?
That's another major concern, the potential for infighting among these various groups, as they vie for power and influence in a post-Assad Syria.
Right. All these different groups, with their own ideologies and ambitions, were united by this common enemy, Assad.
Yeah.
But now that enemy is gone, what's to stop them from turning on each other?
It's a very real possibility, and one that has many observers worried. Syria has already endured so much conflict and bloodshed. The last thing anyone wants is to see these various rebel groups turn on each other, plunging the country into yet another cycle of violence.
And as if the potential for internal conflict wasn't enough, there's another looming threat we need to discuss: ISIS.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room. ISIS may have been relatively quiet in recent years, but their ideology hasn't disappeared. They've undoubtedly been watching these events unfold very closely, looking for any opportunity to exploit the chaos and regain a foothold in Syria.
It's a chilling thought. The last thing Syria needs is a resurgence of ISIS, adding another layer of violence and instability to an already volatile situation.
It's a scenario that has international security experts deeply concerned. The potential for ISIS to capitalize on the power vacuum and the uncertainty surrounding HTS's true intentions is a major threat that cannot be ignored.
So we've got potential power struggles within HTS, potential infighting among all these various rebel groups, and the potential for ISIS to stage a comeback. It's a bleak outlook.
It's certainly not ideal, but it's important to remember that situations like this are fluid and complex. There's no easy answer, no clear path forward. And we need to consider not just these internal dynamics, but also the international implications of Assad's fall.
Right, we can't forget about the larger geopolitical game. That's been playing out in Syria for years. What happens now to all those external actors who were so invested in Assad's regime? Russia, Iran, and even Western powers like the U.S. What was their next move be?
That's a crucial question, and one that's difficult to answer definitively at this point. We know that Syria's civil war has always been a proxy war, a battleground for competing interests. Russia and Iran, as we discussed, had significant strategic interests in maintaining Assad's grip on power. And Western powers, while officially opposed to Assad, have also been involved supporting various rebel factions.
So with this sudden shift in power, how will these external players react? Will they try to influence this new political landscape? Or will they step back and allow the Syrians to determine their own future?
It's still too early to say with any certainty, but the initial reactions from some key players are beginning to emerge. The UN, for example, has called for an orderly transition, urging all parties to engage in dialogue to prevent further bloodshed.
But given the complexity of the situation, the deep-seated animosity between these different groups, and the vested interests of all these various external actors, achieving a peaceful and smooth transition seems like a monumental task.
It's a long shot, to say the least. A more likely scenario is that we'll see a period of prolonged instability, with various factions jockeying for position, and external actors continuing to exert their influence, often at cross purposes.
So if you could speak directly to a Syrian citizen right now, what would you say to them about their future? What can they expect in the coming months and years?
That's a difficult question. I'd say that while the fall of Assad marks the end of an era, it doesn't necessarily guarantee a brighter future. The road ahead will be challenging, filled with uncertainty and the potential for further hardship. It's essential for Syrians to remain resilient, to hold on to hope, but also to be realistic about the complexities and challenges that lie ahead.
It's a heartbreaking situation. After enduring years of conflict, displacement, and loss, the Syrian people deserve peace and stability, but achieving those things in the current context is going to require immense effort, both internally and from the international community.
It will indeed. The international community has a moral obligation to assist the Syrian people in rebuilding their lives and their country. And this includes providing humanitarian aid, supporting efforts to rebuild infrastructure, and working to create conditions that foster peace and reconciliation.
And what about Assad himself? He's gone, but what happens to him now? Will he face any consequences for the atrocities committed under his regime?
That's a question many are asking, and the answer remains unclear. His current location is unknown, and speculation ranges from him seeking refuge with allies like Russia or Iran to him disappearing into obscurity, leveraging his family's wealth to evade justice.
Given the accusations of war crimes and crimes against humanity against him, harboring Assad would be a diplomatic nightmare for any country. But then again, we've seen dictators evade accountability before. It wouldn't be unprecedented.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice can be a long and arduous process, especially in situations as complex as the Syrian conflict. But the international community must not waver in its commitment to holding those responsible for atrocities accountable.
It's a difficult balance. On the one hand, there's this desire for retribution, for those who perpetrated such horrific acts to be brought to justice. On the other hand, there's also the need for healing, for reconciliation, for a future where Syrians can move forward without the shadow of the past hanging over them.
You've perfectly articulated the challenge achieving justice, while also fostering reconciliation is a delicate and complex process. It requires careful consideration, a nuanced approach, and a commitment to ensuring that the voices of the Syrian people are heard and their needs are prioritized.
It feels like we're standing at a precipice. The fall of the House of Assad is a pivotal moment, but the path forward is shrouded in uncertainty.
That's an apt analogy. It's a time of both hope and trepidation. A time for reflection on the lessons learned from this devastating conflict, and a time to consider how best to support the Syrian people as they navigate this uncharted territory.
Yeah, it really is a lot to process. I mean, we've gone from this image of Assad as this almost untouchable figure to this sudden, almost cinematic collapse of his regime. And I keep coming back to something you said earlier about how Assad, in a way, was a pawn in a much bigger game.
Yes, the dynamics at play in Syria extend far beyond its borders. Assad's downfall underscores just how interconnected global politics really are, and how events in one corner of the world can really reverberate across continents.
And it highlights how even seemingly powerful leaders can be swept away when the tides of history kind of shift against them.
Precisely, Assad's regime, despite its intricate web of alliances and all its security measures, ultimately proved vulnerable to these forces of change. Fueled by internal discontent and shifting external dynamics, it's a stark reminder that power, no matter how entrenched it may seem, is ultimately a fragile thing.
It makes you think about the unintended consequences of external involvement in conflicts. We discussed how Russia, Iran, even Western powers were all pulling strings in Syria, pursuing their own interests.
And now, with the sudden collapse of the Assad regime, those external actors are faced with this new reality, a situation they may not have fully anticipated or planned for.
It's almost as if they were so focused on playing their own game that they failed to see the bigger picture, the underlying tensions and vulnerabilities that ultimately led to this dramatic unraveling.
That's a very insightful observation. The Syrian conflict serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of meddling in the affairs of other nations. It's a reminder that interventions, even those undertaken with good intentions, can have unforeseen and often detrimental consequences.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway that you hope our listener walks away with? What's that most crucial question they should be pondering as they consider the future of Syria?
The question that lingers for me, and I think for many observers of this conflict, is whether this traumatic change will ultimately lead to a more peaceful and stable Syria. Will this be a turning point towards a brighter future, a chance for the Syrian people to rebuild their lives and their nation? Or will it simply usher in a new era of conflict and uncertainty, with new power struggles and new external actors vying for influence?
It's a question with no easy answers. It feels like we've turned the page on one chapter of Syria's story, but the next chapter is still being written.
Precisely, the future of Syria remains uncertain, filled with possibilities, both hopeful and daunting. It's a future that will be shaped by the choices made by Syrians themselves, as well as by the actions of the international community.
So as we leave our listener to contemplate the complexities of this historic moment, the fall of the House of Assad, and the uncertain yet hopeful future of Syria, what's the one thought you'd like to leave them with?
I'd say that while the challenges ahead are immense, they are not insurmountable. The Syrian people have shown incredible resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. And it's essential that we as a global community stand with them, offering support, encouragement, and a commitment to helping them build a better future for themselves and for generations to come.
That's a powerful message of hope and solidarity. And on that note, we'll conclude our deep dive into the fall of the House of Assad. It's been a thought-provoking journey, and we encourage our listener to continue exploring, questioning, and engaging with this complex and evolving story. If you enjoy our daily news podcast and want to stay updated, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell for notifications. Your support really helps us bring you the latest news every day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.